What just happened in Detroit could rewrite economic history. A policy meant to protect American steel has backfired so quickly, so violently, that the Rust Belt is reeling. This isn't just about tariffs. This is about assembly lines frozen in silence, steel prices soaring, parts shipments halted, jobs put on hold, and a neighbor slamming the trade door shut with brutal finality. If you want to understand how one decision sent Detroit spiraling and gave Canada the upper hand in this unfolding economic standoff, stay with us. But before we dig in, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what happens next in this rapidly evolving global game. On June 4, 2025, the world changed with a single signature. President Trump announced a crushing 50% tariff on imported steel and aluminum, double the rate from 2018. Within hours, the cost of steel in the US jumped from $700 to $900 per ton. And that was just the beginning. Canada, which had long been America's closest and most reliable steel supplier, responded in kind. Every outbound railcar carrying Canadian steel to Detroit suddenly stopped. Just like that, the supply chain snapped. Detroit grinds to a halt. The impact was instant. Detroit, the heart of America's auto industry, went dark. Assembly lines stalled. Robots froze mid-task. Paychecks vanished as night shifts were cancelled. Ford's River Rouge plant had to shut down 2 of its lines due to a lack of material. Suppliers scrambled, and workers were sent home without notice. Meanwhile, across the border, Canadian furnaces roared back to life. Hamilton's steel mills, fueled by clean energy, lit up the skyline like wartime factories. Orders poured in from global automakers looking for stability. Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't just watch, he fired back, calling Trump's tariff an own goal of historic scale. And then he shut the trade door, loudly, and with no intention of reopening it soon. Canada hits back hard. Carney made it clear, Canada would no longer be a backdoor supplier for a country that used tariffs as weapons. US orders evaporated overnight. Catherine Cobden, head of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, confirmed it, selling to the US was no longer viable. That meant 12 million tons of steel that usually flowed south every year just disappeared. And with it, the raw material Motor City depended on. Canadian producers quickly pivoted to new markets in Europe and Asia, locking in long-term contracts. What was once a tightly woven supply chain between neighbors unraveled almost instantly, leaving Detroit scrambling, while Ottawa strengthened its global foothold. Wall Street reacts, and so does Main Street. Wall Street didn't like the news. The S&P 500 dipped sharply. Traders called it the Trump session teaser. And that was just from the headlines. But the real damage was in the jobs. Michigan's unemployment rate jumped to 5.4%, the worst in the country. Local economists pointed to one thing, the disappearance of Canadian coal. Every Ford F-150 built in Dearborn swallows up 1 ton of steel. At $900 a ton, Ford was burning through over $30,000 worth of metal every hour. The math was brutal, a $1.3 billion steel bill before a single truck rolled off the line. And that wasn't just Ford. Multiply that across the entire industry, and you see how quickly things fall apart. Desperation in Washington and a cold shoulder in Ottawa. By July, the situation worsened. A group of US senators, desperate to rescue the supply chain, crossed into Ottawa to plead with Carney to loosen the grip. But Carney wasn't budging. Instead, he proposed quotas that would keep even more steel at home. Then, Ottawa launched its next move, a $1 billion fund to modernize Canadian steel mills. The message was unmistakable, Canada would no longer be America's safety net. Meetings ended in frustration, with one US official calling the tone in Ottawa icier than Arctic air. Meanwhile, American manufacturers grew louder in their outrage, as deadlines slipped and costs skyrocketed. The rise of clean steel in Canada. The plan: rip out old, coal-powered blast furnaces and replace them with electric arc and hydrogen-powered rigs. The goal was clear: build the cleanest, greenest steel industry in the world. With Ontario's grid already 93% emissions-free, thanks to hydro and nuclear power, Canada was in a perfect position to lead the next era of low-carbon steel. And that gave them a major advantage. Investors began pouring in, seeing not just a regional upgrade, but a global shift. European automakers and Asian tech giants alike took notice, signing early contracts to lock in cleaner steel for climate-conscious supply chains. Canada wasn't just adapting, it was racing ahead. Europe's carbon border and Canada's golden ticket. Europe was watching. The EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, is set to begin in 2026. It will charge importers based on the carbon footprint of the goods they bring in. That means Canadian steel, made with clean energy, gets green tagged. US steel, still 63% coal-fed, gets red flagged. Suddenly, every ton of Canadian steel becomes more valuable in global markets. Steel no longer flows south. Carney wasn't just playing defense. He was playing chess. As Canada locked in new contracts with European buyers, every ton that once went to Detroit now headed to Rotterdam or Busan. Ottawa even tightened its own import rules, slashing quotas for cheap slab from countries like Turkey and Brazil. Anything above the cap now faced its own 50% tariff. Canada was walling itself in, and building a fortress of clean industry. And that fortress is powered by strategic alliances, green policies, and high-tech monitoring systems that guarantee compliance, making Canadian steel the most attractive product in a world demanding sustainability and trust. Ford feels the squeeze. Meanwhile, Trump's tariff plan was imploding. Ford had already warned investors in May that the tariffs would add $2.5 billion in unexpected costs, forcing the company to pull its profit forecast. That pain wasn't limited to the factory floor. Dealers across America started slapping temporary surcharges on cars. A mid-size crossover built in Mexico saw its price spike by $2,000 almost overnight. The ripple effects hit consumers hard. Families already struggling with inflation now faced even higher auto loan payments, putting dreams of upgrading their vehicle completely out of reach for the average middle-class household. Energy sector shockwaves. The ripple effects were devastating. Small drillers in Texas and North Dakota couldn't get steel pipe without paying a premium. Midstream service firms saw contracts vanish. Even Enbridge's maintenance crews were forced to reuse old stock, as new deliveries were stuck in customs limbo. Canada, meanwhile, kept climbing. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario signed a new deal requiring all infrastructure projects, pipelines, rail spurs, service roads, to use only steel melted in Ontario. That kicked US suppliers off the bid sheets entirely. EU Carbon Gate seals the deal. And then came the killer move, Europe's carbon toll gate. Starting January 1, 2026, every ton of imported steel is taxed based on how dirty it is. The EU estimates the cost at nearly $90 per ton. Canada's low-emission coil will breeze through. US steel. It'll pay the toll or get priced out. The new policy aligns perfectly with Europe's Green Deal and effectively rewires global trade priorities overnight, favoring producers like Canada who invested early in decarbonization while penalizing older, more polluting operations locked in outdated production methods. The trap tightens. American manufacturers are stuck. If they want to sell to Europe, they have to cut emissions. But cleaning up blast furnaces takes years and billions in investment. And with tariffs at home and carbon tolls abroad, US steel is getting crushed from both sides. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's tariffs will cost the average American family $1,296 this year. That's a whole month of grocery money gone. Meanwhile, Ford bleeds billions, Michigan leads the country in unemployment, and the supply chain continues to snap. And policymakers in DC still can't decide whether to subsidize or regulate their way out. Canada's industrial moonshot. And Canada. They just turned a crisis into a moonshot. With a carbon passport in hand, Canadian steel rolls straight into European ports, while US steel faces a double tax. Detroit is left with rusting robots and empty order books. And Carney. He's already laying the next tracks for a green industrial revolution. Behind the scenes, Canadian universities are partnering with industry leaders to develop next-gen alloys, while public investments in hydrogen tech and circular manufacturing are rewriting the future of North American heavy industry, one solar-powered furnace at a time. Which path will Washington choose? So here's the big question: will Washington finally pivot to clean steel? Or will it double down on tariffs and hope the rest of the world waits? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because the next move in this global steel game might just come from you. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss another twist in this economic saga.